Everybody, I'm Collier Neely. I'm the Executive Director for the Landmarks Foundation of Montgomery, but also a member of the board for Yourtown, Alabama. Just want to say thank y'all for joining this event. We're really happy to have Jason Fondren with the KPS Group here to talk about municipal planning in Alabama. But before we get going with that real quick, I just want to remind you all of a few things. The Greening Your Community workshop, that's this Thursday on the 17th. In Montevallo, the registration for that is still open. If you had not had a chance to register for that, we highly recommend you do. Yourtown, Alabama, with a couple of other organizations here in the state are presenting that. And you can register through Main Street Alabama's website. And then the second thing is Yourtown, Alabama's workshop is actually gonna happen this year in 2022. The dates for that event are April 27th through the 29th. At Camp McDowell as usual. So be looking out for the registration for that through our social media and our website. And with that, Jason, thanks for being here. Go ahead and start her off.
All right, thanks Collier. As Collier said, I'm Jason Fondren with KPS Group. We're an architecture and planning consultant firm in Birmingham. I've been working in planning in Alabama for about 25 years. And when I think about that, it makes me feel a bit old, but that being said, we're here to talk about municipal planning in Alabama, and I wanted to really get across in the time that we have, three key points, which is it's a value to you to understand the local planning system, that it is built around the State Code of Alabama and what is allowed to cities and towns to be able to do through planning, and that planning will help you to achieve better design in your community. Okay, so with that, one way that it's maybe helpful to understand why planning is of value is to understand what happens in the absence of planning. Now, two things really drive how communities develop. That's the market and your local government. Without planning, those things are not necessarily going to get you where you want to go with improving your community and getting the preserving places that you value and seeing that new development that is added into the community is in keeping with your vision. So you are beholden, in the absence of planning, to what others are going to give to you, whether those are folks from outside the community or those folks inside the community. Imagine having a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle that 1,000 different people are putting together in isolation. All that they can really possibly understand about what that puzzle is ultimately going to look like is confined to their own individual piece. And part of that is because they, often enough, people will have fairly narrow focus in terms of how they make their decisions. They're not necessarily always thinking about, well, what can I do on my piece of property that is going to be for the betterment of the community overall and over the next 20 or 30 years? They're thinking, how can I get the greatest value out of this asset that I have? So with planning, it helps to put those sorts of decisions into context and helps to lessen the risk of a lot of scattershot decisions and investments that can really change the way that your community grows. Now, planning in essence is a form of government intervention. It tells the market what it can or can't do. But, as we know through American history, that has become necessary at some points because unfettered capitalism can have a bit of a dark side to it. Think about slavery or children working in coal mines, environmental pollution, hot dogs, that kind of thing. So basically, planning provides a balance. And that balance helps to make sure that what the local government is doing and investing in the physical development of the community and what the market is doing to put private funding into building homes and building businesses, that all of that is working well together, and there's a mutual benefit that comes out of that. So planning kind of channels the power of the market to make your community better. Now, on to the government side of that. Even though we expect our town councils, our city councils, to always be making decisions in the best interest of the community, and quite often they are doing that, without a plan, we can't be sure that those good decisions that they're making really, when you look at them from a longer view, that those good decisions are the right decisions, and that they are going to help steward, sustainable improvement in the community over time. A decision that's made today might simply be reactive to a problem that you're experiencing, but it doesn't really line you up to have a better future down the road. Another problem that you can see when you don't plan is that with local governments, city administrations change over the years, and even if you were to do a plan at one point in time, if subsequent administrations don't pay attention to that plan, their policies and the decisions that they make can vary widely from what was originally a consensus viewpoint of the way that the community should grow. So the plan represents a community vision, something that is based on a consensus of the people, and is not just the philosophies of a few individuals. So why is it important? Understanding the planning system puts you into a place where you can make positive change. Whether that is you're in a community that is growing and you want to see that new growth to be different or better than what you're seeing, or there are special places in your community that you want to protect. Whether it's your downtown, or maybe you have some historic neighborhoods, maybe you have some environmental areas that you want to preserve or take better care of, or maybe you want to have parks that are built in your community so that where they're placed, you can get to them easily. Kids can walk to them. Maybe you want to have neighborhoods that look like places where people are going to walk around and get to know one another, and they don't look like places where cars are stored overnight. It all starts with the state's planning enabling legislation, and this is in Title 11, Chapter 52 of the Code of Alabama. This was originally put into the Code of Alabama back in around the 30s, maybe in the late 20s, but this was a pretty widespread throughout the United States. States adopting language into their state constitutions, granting powers to local governments to do planning. If you have any problems sleeping, I've got, go follow this link that's on the screen here, because the Code of Alabama is the longest constitution in the world, and it's chock full of really interesting stuff. So who are the local players in the planning system? Well, of course, there's the city council. They are really ultimately deciding how and to what degree your city's or town's plan is going to be implemented. They set policies, they enact laws and regulations, and they decide how tax revenue is spent. If it's going to be spent on building a new park, or fixing potholes, building a bridge, planting trees, what have you. that all gets decided at the council level. So if you've got things in your plan that you want to do and the council is not funding those, then the plan's going to go unimplemented. They get together, once every 2 to 4 weeks, and they make really, really important decisions. Hopefully, with a plan, they are able to make well-informed decisions that are all, they're not in isolation. They're connected to the other issues within the community. But we, of course, know that politics and money can often strain local decisions and maybe not always 100% in support of your city's plan. Another important group is the Planning Commission. They are sometimes known by other names in communities. I think they do this just to confuse those of us who are sitting out in the audience. They might go by the Planning Board or the Planning and Zoning Board or the Planning and Zoning Commission or something similar to that, but state code refers to them as the Planning Commission and the Planning Commission only. So don't get confused. They're the Planning Commission and you need to treat them as they are. They can have a very significant impact on your community. They're not elected, they're appointed primarily by the mayor. There are a few other individuals who are sort of special designees who are on there, but they are appointed officials, not elected, and they serve generally fairly long terms. We often see that they are reseated multiple times, so you can see Planning Commission members who are on the Planning Commission for 15, 20 years because they just keep getting appointed over and over again. They are the party that's primarily responsible under the state code for preparing and adopting your local plan. It's not the council. One of their other key roles is making recommendations to the council on zoning issues. They also administer subdivision regulations, and that's we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few moments. And another power that they have under the state code, which is frankly it's not used I think often enough, is that they are responsible for reviewing and approving public projects. So whether that's a new public building or a park or a road project, the state code says that they need to review it for its location, character, and extent and vote on it. And the state code says that if the Planning Commission votes down a public project, then the sponsor of that project, whether it's the council or the city or county school board or county commission, whatever body is sponsoring that project, they have to have a public meeting and vote to override the Planning Commission's disapproval of it. Again, this doesn't happen a lot, but it can be an important catch if there are some things about a proposed public project that isn't so hot. It puts it more into a public forum so that not only does the Planning Commission get to have their input into it, but it creates the opportunity for residents to have some input into it. And if the Planning Commission votes to override it because they found some flaws in it, and then the council or the county commissioner, whoever, says, oh no, we're disregarding the Planning Commission's decision and we're voting on it, then the community can say, maybe we don't want to elect those folks over again. All right, so all of this is about the planning, and the centerpiece of that is a plan. The state code refers to this as a master plan, which the name has sort of an ominous quality to some folks. And over the years, a lot more people have called it a comprehensive plan because it includes a lot of different things and maybe doesn't sound as nefarious as a master plan. What how they're put together and what goes into them has really changed a little bit over time. The state code language is fairly inclusive in terms of what goes in there. It specifies some things, but doesn't say that you can't add some other things to it. They'll often have some documentation of goals and objectives, which come out of the community engagement process for the plan. What the state code does say in there is that it has to deal with land use or zoning, and that it has to deal with infrastructure, which includes parks, public facilities, roads, water, sewer, et cetera, et cetera. So you're going to, you should have, in a city's plan, those things should be addressed because that's expected under the terms of the state code. But the state code does say that a plan can be developed in pieces. Sometimes you will have an initial master plan that is created, and then parts are layered on through preparation and adoption of subsequent plans. So you might have a major street plan or a citywide bicycle pedestrian plan that gets added on there later. Parks and recreation, economic development, all sorts of things can be layered onto the master plan. There are also some types of plans that are more, they're developed to be more area specific, so they're not citywide. Those can also be added, supplemental plans to the master plan, downtowns, neighborhoods, highway corridors. All of those plans have to be adopted by the Planning Commission for them to be a part of the city's master plan. The state code also refers to redevelopment and urban renewal plans. These are a little trickier. I'm not going to get into them, but there's some unique value to them. They are in a totally different section of the state code. They're not adopted by the Planning Commission. They have to be passed by the governing body, the town council or the city council, to do them. This is the part of the state code that also deals with housing authorities and redevelopment authorities, and grants those agencies considerable power. So that's a topic for another time, but they're an important part of the overall planning for communities. So a little bit more about what goes into plans and how they're done. They usually have about a 20-year outlook. The state code doesn't say how long they need to be in terms of their projections and horizon, how often they're supposed to be updated or replaced. That's not really spoken about in the state code. They are policy. They're not regulation. So they don't have what you would call teeth. The extent to which they do have teeth is whether or not they're followed by the Planning Commission and the council. Of course, if there are zoning or public investments that are done contrary to the plan, the plan's not going very far. So it's really the commitment of those government bodies to follow the plan that gives them their true impact. The plan is used by the Planning Commission and the council in the process of making zoning decisions, or it's supposed to, and in other types of city decisions, such as investments in public projects, public facilities, road widening, things of that nature. And they are, the best practice is that they are built around community involvement so that they create a collective vision for the community. Something that, the elected appointed officials can look at and say, this is what the community wants, so we are expected to do this, as opposed to being, put together by a small group of city officials who say, well, we know what's right, so here's our plan. The danger of that is somebody gets voted out, there's a new administration in place in 4 years, they're not going to follow the plan because that administration's plan. That's not our plan. If it's the community's plan, then every subsequent administration has some expectation to follow it. Plans have to balance different interests. Primarily, you will see conflicts in your community between business interests and everything else. So the plan has to, looking at what the community wants to achieve, setting some goals. The plan needs to create that sort of balance. Well, we want economic development, but we also want this other thing that if we pursue economic development in a vacuum, then we might not get to achieve this other thing that we want to do. What, preserving a downtown or a historic neighborhood, or having a park in this location, as opposed to leveling a place and putting in some types of business development or what have you. There are always going to be potential for conflicts, and this is the plan helps to create sort of from a policy foundation a balancing of those potentially conflicting interests. All right, so before I get into this next part of the discussion today, I want to take a quick break to see if anybody has any questions about what I've said so far. We're going to talk a little bit about how plans are implemented after this. But if there are any questions, feel free to share those through the Q&A function. And Collier, if you will, share those with everybody, read those out for us, and we'll try to respond to those. Do I have anything?
No, not yet. We don't.
Okay.
One did come up in the chat. Do the authorities of planning commissions vary by size of the municipality?
The authority, well, yes and no. The way that they are created, the membership who is put on them, how big they are, there's a little bit of difference there from different classes of community, which are based on population. But the variations are pretty limited to, like, the very largest municipalities have a slightly different setup than everybody else. But the authority is pretty much the same. Now, in county planning commissions, have a little bit different set of authorities than towns. And in some counties have special legislation for them that further makes some distinctions and makes things a little weird. Baldwin County, for instance, the Baldwin County Planning Commission does not adopt their plan. The county commission does, which is kind of the county commission is kind of like the city council for a city. So that's, a reversal of roles in a way. But that's a unique thing just to Baldwin County. That's not something that applies universally. Anything else?
Nope, that's it.
Okay. All right, we'll jump into zoning. I'll try to get through this section pretty quickly. It's easy to get into the weeds when talking about some of this stuff, but zoning is one of the key ways that in the local planning system, you are able to impact the design of the community. So sometimes it's not done so well. But it's all empowered under the state code, under Title 11, Chapter 52, Article 4. It is established as a police power, which is what we refer to the authority that governments have over people and property to the extent it's necessary to protect the health, safety, and general welfare. For cities and towns in Alabama, you can only apply zoning up to the city limits, with the exception of Montgomery. Weird. A topic for another conversation, another time. And so let me get next slide. So what goes into a zoning ordinance? What is all made out of? Well, as you expect, you have a zoning map and you have a zoning ordinance. The zoning map lays out the various districts, and the zoning ordinance says what's allowed in those districts. There are generally two key parts to the regulations. It's what uses are permitted, and then some variation of setback requirements, how big lots have to be, how tall buildings can be, so on and so forth. Over the years, there have been different approaches to zoning. The original ones were what's considered Euclidean zoning, which is based on the city Euclid, which had one of the first zoning ordinances. And those have all tended to be very focused on what uses are allowed in this district, what uses are allowed in this other district. Over time, there have been experiments with other types of zoning. Performance-based zoning is one that came up, I think it was probably maybe back in the 60s or 70s when it started to really evolve. It sounds really logical, but it's rarely used, in part because it can be sort of complicated to enforce. But rather than really focusing on what uses are allowed in districts, it says, you know, in this district you can only make this much noise, you can only have this bright of lights, you can only create this much traffic. You know, so the behavior or the performance of different uses is regulated as opposed to the use. Again, it's a fairly uncommon. There are some aspects of performance-based zoning that gets incorporated into more standard types of zoning. You just kind of spliced in little bits here and there. Then there's the sort of newest form of zoning. It's been around, I would say, for probably about 20 years. Form-based zoning, which puts a little less emphasis on regulating uses, certainly not to the fine grain of detail that you get in regular conventional zoning ordinances, and instead focuses on the form of development. So whereas a normal zoning code will say you have to set back this far, and you have to have a lot size of this much, the form-based code gets more into being more prescriptive. You need to do this as opposed to you can't do that. So it is intended to create a set of desired building forms, as opposed to saying you have to stay 20 feet back from the front lot line and 30 feet from the back lot line, so on and so forth. So who is responsible for making all this stuff happen? Well, this lucky guy, which goes by many different names in communities. He may be a city planner, a planning director, a zoning officer, a building inspector. What you see in many communities in Alabama, particularly the smaller towns, you'll have a building inspector who's responsible for dealing with zoning, because perhaps the town is not large enough to have multiple people dealing with, one person dealing with the building code and another person dealing with the zoning code. Unfortunately, what you see with a lot of the communities where you have a building inspector dealing with zoning is, particularly if they've not been doing it for very long, building inspectors don't know anything about zoning any more than the average person. This is not to say that they're completely ignorant. I mean, they're just sort of know about as much as anybody. Their expertise is in looking at building plans and saying this does or does not comply with the building code, and going out and inspecting a project. They don't deal with planning and zoning. So sometimes there is a bit of a gap in kind of getting what you want through your plan or from your plan through your zoning when you don't have somebody who has a background in that. That being said, there are plenty of really great folks throughout the state who deal with zoning, who don't have backgrounds in it, but they've been doing it for long enough that they know they've learned on the job, and they are quite good at implementing the zoning ordinance. They review development plans. When you get a rezoning request from a property owner, they help facilitate that and get that before the council, planning commission, board of adjustments. Speaking of those, let's talk about those. So the city council, what do they do? Again, the city council is a legislative body. So that means they're the lawmakers. Zoning is a set of laws. So it requires the council and their authority granted to them by the state code to make changes to the law. If you want to change the zoning map, you are changing the law. If you want to change something in the ordinance, if you want to change the setback in your R1 district from 35 to 40, you're changing the law. So the council has to do that. The planning commission, in terms of zoning, they are a key player, but they have limited power. They have advisory power. So whenever a rezoning case comes before the city or the town, the planning commission gets it first. They review it. They say, this makes sense because this is what we have in our master plan, or it doesn't make sense, or we're not sure. Council, you take it from here. But that's, again, they have limited authority when it comes to zoning. Another group in terms of zoning is the Board of Adjustments. Sometimes it's the Board of Zoning Adjustments or the Zoning Board of Adjustments. But they have 4 specific powers that are granted by the state code. When a staff decision is, the building inspector or the city planner makes an interpretation of the zoning ordinance and the property owner says, yeah, I don't think that's right, they go to the Board of Adjustments to get that issue clarified. So in a way, they're like a little miniature Supreme Court for zoning in your community. And they also deal with special exceptions, which is a specific term used in the state code, but is really not defined. So it's a hot mess in terms of what a special exception could be. And so it's used in a lot of different ways. But at the same time, sometimes when the state code doesn't specify things very clearly, that can be used for the good of communities, frankly. Variances, another hot mess. Variances are to be used in exceptional and unique circumstances, but in a lot of communities, they are handed out like candy on Halloween. That typically means that the zoning rule that is variance is being given for is either too restrictive, or that the Board of Adjustments or the city policy is not married up with the zoning rules. They're not committed to enforcing that rule because they don't believe in it. So they will hand out variances. Change your rules if you're not going to enforce them. Don't just keep handing out variances. It sets really bad precedents. And finally, nuisance abatement, and that's really another one that's not really used a lot. Zoning boards are able to bring in property owners who, the easiest example of this would be some type of an industry that is creating a lot of noise or smoke or odor or, some impact on neighboring uses. They can bring them before the Board of Adjustments, and the Board of Adjustments kind of arbitrates how they're going to mitigate that problem they're creating, and set a timeline for them to fix the problem. But that's a really important power, but unfortunately, I don't think it is used quite often enough in our communities. Quickly, some ideas for how to improve community design and make better places. in communities through zoning. One of these is using fewer zoning districts and allowing a little bit more mixture of uses in each of those districts. When zoning first started out, you would have maybe one residential zone, an industrial zone, and then a commercial zone. Or some communities just had an industrial zone and everything else. Today, I go into a small town with a zoning ordinance that has like 7 different residential districts. That indicates to me that they are micromanaging residential development, and they are trying to keep everything separated. So like, somebody wants to build townhouses. Those townhouses need to be kept as, far away from my, 1 acre lot as possible. And we just don't really want to see a whole bunch of that in our community. It doesn't help to make great neighborhoods. It helps to make things that are really homogeneous and isolated from one another. Change the rules to make sure that the zoning ordinance is actually creating good design. If you have a zoning ordinance in your town and you're not pleased with the character of development, look at what the zoning ordinance is requiring to be done. Sometimes it may be requiring things that you really don't want, and the developer is putting money into that when they could have been spending some money on making it better in a way that you appreciate more. Maybe that's snout houses, the patio homes, or any of these smaller lot subdivisions where everything you see up and down the street is driveways and garages. Sometimes the rules not only accommodate that, but they make other variations of housing development more impractical, or make it more expensive. So if you don't like this, then look at your rules and see how you can make them to kind of flip the coin and make this either impossible or make it more difficult to build this than having the garage set back further than the house, or kind of just away from the street a bit. Deal with this issue a lot in most communities because developers like to build this, but when we go through the planning process, communities say this is exactly what we don't want, but the zoning ordinance allows it all over the place. Sometimes makes it easier to do this than the other. Make sure your rules are environmentally friendly. You're not requiring excessive amounts of parking that's going to exacerbate how much impervious surface you have, and then it's going to create stormwater problems. And landscaping requirements, various things that you have in your ordinance can be less conducive to sort of environmental conservation. Good parking requirements. A lot of communities with downtowns don't have much parking, and it would be illegal to build those places today the way that they are because they don't provide the amount of parking. So make some exemptions for that. Allow some reductions for places that share parking, or that where you have different types of uses using the same parking area, but parking facility, but they use that parking at different times, or they have different peak periods where they need that parking. And then there's some different zoning tools you can use. Overlay district, planned unit development. I mentioned the form-based codes before. A lot of those different tools that you can kind of add into or amend your zoning ordinance to have those things in can get at a little bit better design than maybe what you are seeing through your existing zoning regulations today. Subdivision regulations are also really, really important, whereas zoning deals with what gets put on private property. The subdivision regulations deal with what happens in between. So all of your street, the way that your street network is patterned, and what the streets look like, curbs and sidewalks, and all of that is addressed through the subdivision regulations. This is under 1152, Article 2 of State Code. The Planning Commission is under full control of the subdivision regulations, whereas they have a minor role with zoning. They are the be-all, end-all when it comes to subdivisions. And another unique thing about subdivisions is that you can apply these beyond the city limits. This has been in a bit of flux with some legislative changes recently, but at this point, cities are still allowed to exercise subdivision regulations a little bit beyond the city limits. Part of the reason for this is when subdivisions or other types of development happen on the fringes of the community, likely at some point, 5, 10, 20 years down the road, it's going to get annexed, and the city is going to be responsible for maintaining those streets. If those streets were built substandard, 10, 20 years ago, they're definitely going to be in bad shape by the time they get annexed. So it's in the best interest of the community from a fiscal responsibility standpoint, if nothing else, that cities have the ability to regulate the design of infrastructure around the edges of the city, because they're likely to be responsible for it in the long run. Some ideas for better placemaking in communities through subdivision regulations. Link the requirements in the subdivision regulations to some of your adopted plans. One of the key things here is, for example, the transportation plan or major street plan. If your plan says we need to have a major road on the northwest side of town in approximately this location, through the subdivision regulation process, when subdivisions occur in the northwest part of town, the Planning Commission can say, when you build this subdivision, you need to give us this right of way, so that the city can go in and build this road. You can also kind of do the same thing with bicycle and pedestrian trails. Street connectivity is valuable. Although most folks like to have cul-de-sacs, developers like them, they can pack in a few more houses and they don't have to build nearly as much street. All that traffic has to go somewhere. And it's usually, if you have somebody builds a subdivision that has 10 one central neighborhood street, all that traffic is going to be funneled out onto an existing community street at one point. It's going to create congestion. And if you do that, multiply that over and over with lots and lots of subdivisions doing the exact same thing, that existing community road is going to become a nightmare. And it's going to have to be, widened by the city at some point. And at which point we're all having to pay as taxpayers to correct a problem created by developers and allowed to happen by our Planning Commission. So let's be more responsible about that and have street networks develop to where traffic is dispersed more naturally rather than continuing to allow things over and over again that we know are going to create headaches ultimately. Subdivision regulations deal with street design. If you don't like fast driving cars on neighborhood streets, look at your subdivision regulations. They may be causing part of that. If the streets are wide, straight, and flat, then you're likely going to see drivers operating their vehicles much faster. If streets are a little bit narrower, if they have some curve to them, or if there's a little change in topography, drivers are going to pay more attention and they're going to slow down. There are other types of friction, perceived friction, that can be incorporated into street design that helps create more calm, complete streets. Curb and gutter, sidewalks, street trees, on-street parking, which in some communities is hated. Primarily, it's because the streets were designed to not have on-street parking, but then people park on the street anyway, and it creates traffic problems. But if the streets are designed to have on-street parking on them originally, then the on-street parking is not going to be a problem. It can actually help to create better streets. It's not right everywhere. There's a right context for all of these things, whether it's sidewalks, curb and gutter. You know, one set of standards is going to apply better in more intensively developed areas versus others. In design for walkability and bikeability, that is, here's a, sorry, wide street, straight street, faster moving cars. Then you have a narrower street trees, and that other you know, perceived friction. The cars located along the street, cars are going to go a bit slower there. More communities, more home buyers want sidewalks and bicycle facilities in their community than ever before. There have been surveys done by the National Realtors Association that sort of document that home buyers of various different age groups and family types are willing to pay more to live in a neighborhood that has these types of facilities than ones that don't. Most of the communities I've worked for in Alabama, at some point they made a switch. They had not required sidewalks before, and so most of the city didn't have sidewalks, and they said, everybody wants sidewalks. We got to start requiring them. So let's put that in our subdivision regulations. And there, in fact, there have been some communities that, you know, they had been doing that, no sidewalks for so long, and eventually the neighborhoods, you know, kind of matured, and the folks in those communities said, you know, we really want to have sidewalks. And there was so much political pressure that these cities had to start going back and retrofitting these streets to have sidewalks. And it's much, much more expensive to go back in and add sidewalks than it is to do it in the first place when those streets are originally being built. Wrapping up here, some other planning related regulations that help to implement plans. The state code provides some authority for historic preservation through 1168 of the state code, which allows for the creation of a design review process in historic district, locally designated historic districts. If you are on the national register but not on a locally created city council adopted historic district, that is more honorific and doesn't have teeth. So if you want to really have sort of a review and approval process in a downtown or a historic neighborhood, then that has to be done at the local level. Flood prevention, stormwater management, all of these are things that a lot of communities have some amount of regulation in. They may be built into zoning or subdivision regulations, or it be done on their own. Some planning resources that you can tap into to help you in your community's planning efforts. The state is divided up into 12 regional council districts, and most of these provide some type of planning resource, and they are a valuable group to interact with, to find out more, to help get you started on the path to writing a plan or updating the one that you have, or just getting more information about how it all works after today. Design Alabama has the Design Place program and a few other programs that they do that bring planning and design resources to your community and just generally promote planning in the state. Alabama Communities of Excellence, the Alabama chapter of the American Planning Association, the Alabama Historical Commission, League of Municipalities, ADECA, which is a funding source for planning and for a variety of public building projects. The ARC, Appalachian Regional Commission, which is available to sort of the northern parts of the state. It is a multi-state regional group, and they also provide funding for different types of projects. And then to get training to understand planning and zoning better, the UNA's CAPSO program is a great resource. You can send your council, your planning commission, and get them to be certified Alabama planning and zoning officials.